Hi, I just wanted to check in again. Twice in 1 week, it's a big deal. I read something today. I'm reading, I think I mentioned it before, the Gospel of John. I'm almost done. It's absolutely incredible. I think I'm on the last chapter here, which is Christian initiation. And so I just wanted to read this little section here, and because it's so profound, so I'll just read it. So it's basically talking about sensory fascism. I don't know if that's going to get my video tagged. And so it was interesting because I was listening to another lecture today on like necessity and the events of today, I think it was called. And he was talking about where and who fascism come from, which is nationalism essentially, and how it thrives today, which was, in the early 1900s. I can't say who, but after listening to that today, I can see why he's been tagged as something that he's not negatively because he names that. But if you look at that, or you look at another religion, they teach that, right? They teach the bloodline. They teach, basically it brings enslavement, doesn't bring unity. And when that gets pushed off into lodges and secret societies and protecting their bloodline and protecting certain groups of people, not just the money, it enslaves humanity because at the top there's these people clamoring over each other. And so anyways, but that's another subject. So he's talking about essentially a sensory fascism and perception from superficial to deep. And so I'm just going to read it. One may say, I know only of this world or that world, but they may not say, I do not admit of the existence of a world that someone else perceives. A person who speaks in this manner demands that others should perceive only just what he himself perceives and nothing else. He claims ultimate authority that only what he perceives is true. No one has the right to say that a world does not exist. He may only say, I cannot perceive it. Someone appears and says, that is all anthroposophical imagining. What anthroposophists declare exists does not exist. He only proves that he and those like him do not perceive these other worlds. We take the positive standpoint. Whoever grants only the existence of what he himself perceives demands not only that we acknowledge what he knows, but also wishes to make an authoritative decision about something of which he knows nothing. There is no greater intolerance than that shown by official science towards spiritual science, and it will become even worse than it was before. So it must be talking about now. People are not at all conscious of saying something which they should not allow themselves to say. In many gatherings of good Christians, one can hear it said, anthroposophists talk about esoteric Christianity, but Christianity doesn't need esoteric teaching, for only that can be true which is simple. An unpretentious mind can perceive and understand. Which means, of course, only that the speaker can perceive and understand. So only what that person is judging and clarifying that we can see is what we can see. So they're ultimately putting themselves in the place of God. He therefore requires that no one should perceive and understand anything different from what he himself perceives and understands. The infallibility of the Pope is quite properly not acknowledged in these Christian assemblies, but the infallibility of the individual, the human/sinner, is claimed today in the widest circles, even by Christians. Anthroposophy is attacked as a result of this papal standpoint, in consequence of which each individual sets himself up as a little pope. Wow. So I just want to go back and read this again. People are not at all conscious of saying something which they should not allow themselves to say. I know I'm guilty of that. I've been guilty of that. I'm trying to be a lot more careful in my words. But this understanding, because words don't have meaning anymore, that's also part of a lecture I listened to get today. It's interesting because in the lecture I listened to, which wasn't this one, in the book, I took some notes because it just seemed ironic that I was reading this and then I also was listening to this, and that was more about World War I and what people were doing to contribute to that, and just horrible things people were saying about Steiner. He read a letter that essentially somebody claimed Steiner wrote a letter and he was getting a group of secret lodge people together to try to trick authorities and stop them, and like basically implying he was staging some type of a political coup, which is very serious. And at the time he said too, he had the Catholic Church was after him, which I understand, these things in defense of that, just because the Catholic Church at that time was probably the best it's ever been. Especially that was around the time of Pope Pius X. And I'm not passing judgment on the Catholic Church for that, because Steiner did come from the Theosophy movement. He was in a secret society, which is crazy because these people said something about the lodge. I can't say the name, but they implied he was working with them. So Steiner continues to be an anomaly because he's somebody that worked in between. And that's something I've always thought of myself, hamake tu e manioko, when I was going to the sweat lodges. For the Lakota, she who walks between worlds is something I've always resonated with, because I've always been able to connect with people of different ages, different cultures, and understand things and commit myself to understanding things, not in a political sense of or Carnegie trying to win friends and influence people, but it's really an interest of mine. I was a true people person. I don't know if that's so much true today after everything I've gone through, but admittedly, something of myself has changed and is different now, and it might not come back, and I've accepted that. But Steiner was that person, and I contrast him with Reich, where Reich at first, he had joined the I'm scared to say any of these words, party for the left, and then he got in there and discovered was not good, and then he ended up trying to go the other way, and he wasn't connecting with his brethren, which was his sort of namesake and culture, and he was rejected career-wise by the people of the same that were running the psychology circuit. / Lodge, Jung and Freud. And so he found himself in a conundrum, basically rejected by everybody as a true anarchist, which is really how I've been most of my life. And just within the last 10 years, I've been able to break through some of these huge, what I thought were, you go through this thing with your character. I think most people do. It's part of our ego where, we try to change things in our character. And then for me, I went through orgonomy. I did all this stuff, and I really did do a lot of deep changes. But then part of maybe our own narcissism or character resistance, we start to say, like, well, I'm just supposed to be that way. This is how I was made. And you start to accept it, even though you're an asshole, And what always checked me with that was I knew this woman who was really, really rude and from New York, and she was a trauma victim for sure. I mean, she admitted it. She was an adopted child into a very wealthy family, and basically these people just gave her as like a doll to the son. And this poor woman was basically like a live-in sex slave and taken from her family, and this is very sad. But she grew up to be a very sick, unhealed, not Christian person doing horrible things. And I had a lot of compassion for her. But, they're like a tornado everywhere they go, like Tasmanian devil. They're tearing people apart. They're causing drama. They're doing naughty, bad things. And it's very hard. But she would say that. She would be very abusive. She would say something extremely rude and get in your face. And she would say, oh, I'm from New York. That's just how I am. I'm from New York. And that just really checked me. Because I was like, that is such a cop-out. You could confess your sins. You could turn to Christ. You could heal. That's not on the table. They're always looking for the long way. They're looking for the shortcut, but it's the long way. They can't be honest with themselves or anybody else. So we all have to look at that, because that's for any of us that can happen to. Any of us can fall into that. But Steiner's very interesting, because here he was kind of in the middle of all that, and he must have been a true Christian. I mean, I believe he was a true Christian, but the fact he was, they burned down the Goldenium, which is horrible. None of us get through this life unscathed. I've had my life burned down. When you're a truth teller, a sightseer, and you're sealed by the Holy Spirit, you know that you're not getting out easy. And it's going to be a fight, and suffering is part of our pathway of humanity. So, but he was able to do it. And even though he had these people after him all the time, and the Catholic Church was after him, well, he had a problem with the Jesuits. They were basically the ones that were posting all those lies about him, provable lies. So that actually reminded me of like what the Muslims do, where they do taqiyya, where they can lie. They say, like, you can lie because it's like part of their religion that you can lie to people who are infidels, that aren't in the movement. So the fact that the Jesuits did that, it's terrible, but he bounced back. So anyways, I hope that you got from that what I did. I was really I love what he said in this, just because as somebody who comes across atheists all the time, and materialists like we do, they come at you like that, or sometimes people are just like, it doesn't exist, nothing exists. Like, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. And then you take these people down a rabbit hole and say, like, you can't see an atom, but we know atoms exist, so do you have to wait for science to catch up on things that some people already inherently know is true? And I keep seeing this. I keep seeing science constantly reinventing and taking the credit for stuff over 100 years ago for Reich and Steiner's work. I see it all the time in social media, like, science just discovered blah blah blah, and I'm like, wait a minute, Steiner said this 120 years ago, you know. So anyways, I think it's interesting. I think it's worth it for you to go back and look at that in that book. I'm not exactly sure what the lectures, I have to look up in the beginning, but it's the chapter on Christian initiation at the end. And excuse me, I'm so tired today. I finished my painting. I'm so excited. I've got my new book coming out, and I finished my painting. It's taken me 2 months working on those 2 huge paintings, so it's a little celebration for me today. But no, I thought it was really good to hear how he points out that these people don't have a right to say that. They're the ones that are ignorant. Somebody doesn't know something, and they're basically, I mean, that's like the ultimate character resistance. You know something to be true, and this person's like, no, it can't be true. Like, there's no way it can be true. Like, not being abstract, because, you know, this is the issue too. You don't want to be abstract, but it's a bully. Like, how close-minded can you be? And they kind of dig themselves into a corner with it. So I'm interested to finish it. Like, I only have a couple pages left, and I'll talk more about it. I'll probably get back on maybe tomorrow and talk about my notes from the other lecture, because I want to put these two together. Talk to you soon. Bye.